this morning, man, is like I've been like parataxic distortion, cognitive dissonance. Because okay, I was talking about parataxic distortion, but I really wasn't talking about parataxic distortion in relation to cognitive dissonance. And I was watching the something about the killing of Philando Castro. I think that's how you say his name. I don't want to mess his name up. And with my pronunciation, may his brother rest in peace. You know, he was the ancestor who turned into the ancestor. And that the jury actually saw like both tapes. You know, they saw the tape of, and this, I mean, white people, and this is what I'm saying. We're never going to get justice because of the disorder that comes from white supremacy. It's a mental disorder. And from that disorder, from that inferiority complex or that narcissistic personality disorder, that group narcissistic personality disorder that is white supremacy, there's parataxic distortion. And that parataxic distortion is maintained by cognitive dissonance. You know, this is, again, you got to talk about Fats Fanon and the psychology of the oppressed. And the psychology of the oppressed also talks about the psychology of the oppressor, and that's cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the ability to not to detach yourself from the actual facts. So if you have a parataxic distortion of how cops are supposed to act and how black people are supposed to react to how cops act, your cognitive dissonance is going to maintain this parataxic distortion. So no matter what evidence is presented to you, the parataxic distortion is going to be the primary way in which you view or perceive reality, cognitive dissonance. So therefore, you're going to see a black man in a car resisting arrest even though he's complying. And you're going to see a justified shooting of a cop even though it's not justified. Parataxic distortion. And the cognitive dissonance that supports that parataxic distortion. So I'm like, dude, I'm sitting here like, dude, you realize we can't win. Because I was watching old boy, the Trevor, the South African guy who took Jon Stewart's place on the Daily Show. Selena was posted there. Somebody else did. I mean, yeah, I think it was. But that. And he was talking about, well, black people think that, thought that if we could get this, on camera and we can present this to someone and they would see it and they would say, hey, of course we see the same thing that you see. This is injustice. And let's, just like the story of Trayvon Martin. And, we just thought, oh, wow, the evidence is just overwhelming. Just like go back to O.J. Simpson, parataxic distortion. Just like with the parataxic distortion in relationship to cognitive dissonance or maintaining the parataxic distortion through cognitive dissonance in relationship to, Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown. And then we also, because I was watching about how Ray Hagan responded to the Mike Brown issue. And again, Ray Hagan being, having his connection to the law enforcement, has a parataxic distortion in relationship to law enforcement, regardless of his ethnicity and his so-called, cultural understanding or his so-called conscious understanding or Pan-African understanding is still distorted by way of his relationship to law enforcement. So therefore, you have this cognitive dissonance in order to support your support for law enforcement. That's the cognitive dissonance right there, because you got to support it. The parataxic distortion comes from what you support, but the cognitive dissonance is to maintain the support. So white people need to support white supremacy. You got to understand that. The majority of white people, when we're talking about these 10,000 snakes and 1,000 of those snakes, the majority of white people are compelled to support white supremacy, so to maintain the parataxic distortion that enables them to maintain white privilege. They're going to hold on to that cognitive dissonance that allows them to just see shit as they want to see shit. You got parataxic distortion. So as long as and then go to this red table thing now. So as long as we continue this victim mentality as if appeasement is going to do something, change their mind somehow. That there's something that is going to occur within their psychology that is going to result in them coming to the reality that we are being oppressed, or the acceptance of we are being oppressed. The vicious cycle goes on. At some point in time, either, and it has to be the codependent, it has to be the codependent, not the individual fostering the codependency, that breaks away. I'll use my own circumstances. My mother, my brother, you know what I'm saying, that familiar structure was never going to was going to say, oh, Alton, you know what? We have our cognitive dissonance, maintaining this parataxic distortion of you that's the reason why we want to maintain this codependent relationship with you. We're sorry, dude, hey, take some money that, you know what I'm saying, that we may have taken from you, and go ahead and become independent and go, you know, live your life. Yeah, hey, Alton. No, that was never going to happen. They were going to create circumstances in which codependency would continue to be fostered, like deplete my resources, throw me out in the street, with the hopes that under some circumstances that I would beg my way back, which has been the cycle, for appeasement, and get validation by way of this appeasement. Oh, they let me back in. And then, you know, it fosters their idea of superiority, and, you know, the certain level of narcissistic mania that they feed, that social metaphysician that they feed on, that, oh yeah, we're here supporting Alton, you know, we made Alton's life better, you know what I'm saying, we endure Alton because he's so, the same thing with black folks in relationship to white folks, you know, they will deplete our resources, you know, they're sure enough that, you know, we're great consumers, you know what I'm saying, they'll convince us not to put those resources back in our own community because somehow that's selfish, you know what I'm saying. They'll convince us somehow that we're better off with them without them, when all the evidence supports the fact we're better off without them. Do you understand what I'm saying? That they're never going to give us what it is that we seek validation. They're never going to validate the fact that they are victimizing us. As long as we play victim, we continue to be victimized, the cycle will go on. There's no way out of this other than, you know, autonomy, a castigation, you know, and castigation is a violent separation. I mean, you know what I'm saying, and not to say that violent means to be motherfucking, you know, physically violent, but it has to be, you know, to a point psychologically and emotionally violent, where we have to just like, sorry, we have to think about our own group psychological and emotional health, because you're not going to do it. And we hope you the best with your own group psychological and emotional health. And any of those 10,000 rattlesnakes that want to come in, you know, any of the 1,000 of them that want to come along and engage in some, you know what I'm saying, healthy interaction, then we'll engage in healthy interaction. And those who want to continue to engage in that unhealthy interaction, we're cool on that. That interpersonal relationship, it has to end at some point in time. And we have to think about our group psychology, just like you have to think about your individual psychology. That goes for, you know, groups have a psychology, and we are social groups, therapeutic groups, corporate groups, and the same psychological dynamic is you. That's what, you know, team building and all that shit is about. It's analyzing the group psychology and recognizing where the faults in that group psychology lie, and fixing those faults, or exploiting them, if and you know, in social biology, our social engineering, and that's what our oppressor is doing, exploiting, because that's what an oppressor does. They'll use psychology to exploit those fractures instead of to heal them, and we need to break this codependency. We can't do this anymore. This is just ridiculous.